Once again, hello YouTube. This is Zack, and welcome to video number 2 of the Crash Course in Music Theory. If you haven't watched the intro or the first video to the series, you might want to go and do that. I said at the end of the last video that we will be learning intervals and triads and sevenths, but as I was making my notes for this video, I came to the conclusion that that was going to be a freakishly long video. So today we are just going to tackle intervals, and then we will leave the other stuff for another video. And just like I said last time, the stuff is simple, but it's hard to really, internalize really quickly. So I'm going to put some practice problems. I guess problems is the right word. I don't know. Some practice exercises. That's better. I'm going to put some practice exercises in the description box below so you guys can get your practice on. Okay. There's something that I didn't cover in the last video that I should have. It came to my mind as I was writing this video. So I told you that there was nothing in between B and C and that there's nothing between E and F, which is true. It's a half step from B to C, and it's a half step from E to F. And this would lead many people to say there's no such thing as B sharp, there's no such thing as C flat, there's no such thing as E sharp, there's no such thing as F flat. I tell that to like beginner students, but when you grow up, when you get an education and you go to college, you find out that there are some ways that these crazy professors actually make like the terms B sharp or F flat or something actually makes sense. You're like, what the crap is this? And if you are a musician who has never studied like classical music or has never read music like sheet music, then this isn't going to make any sense to you. But just for the sake of you learning the system, there are situations in which you might have to write like a B sharp or like a C flat or something. Here's one of them. Say we're going to play an F sharp major scale. All right, we're playing a good old-fashioned F sharp major scale. What's your first note? F sharp. Then you're going to go up a whole step to G sharp. Then you're going to go up a whole step to A sharp. Everything is A-okay thus far. Then you're going to go up a half step to B. Then you're going to go up a whole step to C sharp. Then you're going to go up a whole step to D sharp. D sharp is the 6th note of the scale. Everything has been totally normal up until this point. Yes, up until this point, because you need to go up another whole step to get to the 7th note of the scale. You're at D sharp. You're going to go up a whole step. Where does that bring you? Well, a normal, sane person would say F, would they not? Because from D sharp to E is a half step, from E to F is another half step. But if we do that, then the last 3 notes of the scale, the 6th, 7th, and 8th notes of the scale would read D sharp, F, F sharp. So there we got a D and 2 Fs and no E, and what the crap. So all the theory professors are freaking out. All the classical musicians don't know what to do. So what do? We take that F and, like madmen, or mad people, to be gender neutral, we take that F and we write it down as an E sharp, because we're insane. Because everything has to be nice and neat, and you have to have one of each letter, and everything has to go up in seconds. And you actually don't know what seconds are, because I haven't taught you that yet, but just trust me. So that's how they do it. That's how they do that. And you can have other examples where you have like F flat, you can have C flat, you can have B sharp, you're going to have all that stuff. You can have them in scales, you can have them in when you do just like intervals. So that's some junk you're going to see. But rest assured, I have never in my guitar playing life looked at a C and been like, yeah, that's a B sharp. That's never happened in my life. But in order to understand this system that I'm teaching you, because it does creep its way into other forms of theory, modern theory, jazz theory, stuff like that. In order to understand the system, you should probably learn how the classical dudes have been doing it for hundreds of years. So that is that. Now let's get to our subject at hand. Today we're going to learn intervals. So what is an interval? An interval is the distance between 2 notes. Okay, that's it. So we know the half step, the whole step, those are distances between notes. I guess I would suppose that those are technically intervals. So today we are going to learn a lot more, pretty much all of them. And that's why it's going to take so freaking long. This lesson will have a lot of stuff that isn't actually going to be terribly practically useful in the real world. To give you an example, the distance between a C sharp and a D, or a C and D flat, you could call that a minor second if you wanted. Or you could just say it's a freaking half step. Or you could just say go to the next note up, go a half step up. No one's in the real world is going to be like, hey man, can you play the note that is a minor second above this note because I'm a loser. No one is ever going to, and that's not going to happen, right? So there is a lot of stuff in this lesson that is super technical and not very practical. And that's why I thought about giving like just kind of a general overview of the topic but I was able to come up with a couple reasons that I think you might need to actually understand the system that the classical guys and that the theory professors have been using for billions of years. So let's get into that system. The first thing that you probably need to know about intervals is that you can think about them in two separate ways. You can think about generic and specific intervals. We'll start with generic intervals. A generic interval is really simple. You're going to ignore the flat signs, the sharp signs, what we call the accidentals, and you're just going to look at the letters, and you're going to count the distance between two letters. And if you are like a rock guitarist or like a funk bassist and you're hearing this, you're like, well, that is absolutely asinine. Why would anyone do that? That doesn't make any freaking sense. You're right. It doesn't. But just bear with me. This is a system that's been used for hundreds of years, and it has an effect on lots of other musical paradigms. So go ahead and learn this. Go ahead and get this in the bag, and then you can move on to rock guitar or funk bass. Anywho, let's give you some examples. So say we're looking at the distance from C to E. We're looking at the interval between C and E. There's no sharps or no flats, so you're just going to count. C is 1, D is 2, E is 3. That means the distance from C to E generically is a third. It is some kind of third. There are different kinds of thirds. There are major thirds, minor thirds, augmented thirds, diminished thirds. But we know that this from C to E is some kind of third. Say you want to go from B flat to E. So you're going to ignore the flat and just count from B to E. B is 1, C is 2, D is 3, E is 4. So the distance from B flat to E is some kind of fourth. One more example, say you want to go from G to D sharp. You ignore the sharp sign on the D, there's nothing to ignore on the G, and you just count from G to D. G is 1, A is 2, B is 3, C is 4, D is 5. So the distance from G to D sharp is some kind of fifth. Note, and this is important, when you're counting intervals like this, there is no zero. It's not like when you count from C to E, you count, okay, so I start at C, and then I go to D, that's 1, and then I go to E, that's 2. No, the note that you start on is 1, and then you count up to the note that you're going to. So from C to D to E is 1, 2, 3. That is a third. Keep that in mind. Remember that. Don't forget that. Knowing generic intervals between notes or between sets of notes typically isn't terribly helpful, but if you have some context, if you know, like, for example, what key a song is in or what scale is being used, then you can actually use these in meaningful ways. So, for example, if I know that we're playing a song in B minor, and you know that we're playing a song in B minor, and that we are using the B minor scale, I could look at you and say, hey, I'm going to sing a melody, you sing a harmony that's like a third above this. And that would make sense. You're going to sing the notes that are a generic third above what I'm singing, but it will be the notes that fall within the B minor scale. So this can be used practically. This does have a little bit of practical application. Now, before we move on to the wonderfully, gloriously exciting topic of specific intervals, I want to ask you, remind you, beg you, plead for you to like the video and subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because these videos actually do take a really freaking long time to make. So if you like them, if you are benefiting from them, then I would really appreciate it if you could help me out in that way. Moving on to our topic of the day, specific intervals. Get ready, because it's about to go down. With specific intervals, you're going to say the generic interval, but you're also going to say what kind of generic interval it is. Is it a minor third? Is it a major third? Is it the augmented third? So you're going to have the generic plus something else. How do you figure out what that plus is? How do you figure out that other section? You do that by identifying how many half steps are between the two notes. So you could just memorize all of them. So there, for example, there's several types of fourths, there's several types of fifths, and each one of them has a different number of half steps. And this goes all the way up to 7. And you could just memorize all of these. But I have kind of thought up what I think might be an easier way to do it, and I'm going to teach it to you that way. And I sincerely apologize if this ruins your musical career because I taught you intervals incorrectly. So here we go. I'm going to teach you one type of each of the intervals. I'm going to teach you one type of second, one type of third, one type of fourth, one type of fifth, sixth, and seventh, and then I'm going to teach you how to adjust those to arrive at the other ones, because I think that will be easier than memorizing them all. So, here we go. So first, let's learn the major second. So from C to D is a major second. So it's a generic second that consists of two half steps. So you have a generic second, so you have one letter and then the next letter. You have 1, 2, and then it consists of two half steps. So from C to C sharp is one half step, from C sharp to D is another half step. A generic second, and then two half steps, that is a major second. How are you going to remember this? Because this is the one that occurs within the major scale. If you look at a C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, the second note is D. So the interval between the first and second note of the major scale is a major second. You can remember it like that, I hope. Now, let's move on to the major third. The major third is going to be a generic third, like, C and E, because C, D, E, 1, 2, 3. And this generic third consists of four half steps. So C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E. That's four half steps. So a generic third and four half steps, that gives you a major third. Remember that. How are you going to remember that? Because you know your C major scale, you know your major scale, and the distance between the first and third note of a major scale is a major third. You can remember it that way. Moving on. Next, we have a fourth, but it's not called a major fourth. It's called a perfect fourth. Why is it called a perfect fourth? I don't know. I'm sure there's a reason, and I'm sure if I thought about it hard enough, I could figure it out, but I don't care. So the perfect fourth is a generic fourth that consists of five half steps. And just like with the other two examples, this is what you see in the major scale. So the distance between the first and fourth note of a major scale is a perfect fourth. So in our C major scale example, we have C and F. That is a perfect fourth. Moving on to the fifth, we have the exact same thing. We have a perfect fifth. A perfect fifth is a generic fifth that consists of seven half steps. And you see that in the major scale as well. The distance from the first note of the major scale to the fifth note of the major scale is a perfect fifth. In our C major example, we're going from C to G. That's a generic fifth. C, D, E, F, G, that's 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 7 half steps. C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G. Moving on to our sixth. Now we're back to major. We have a major sixth that is a generic sixth that consists of 9 half steps. And yes, we see that in the major scale as well. You have, in our C major example, you have C and you have A. The distance between C and A is a generic sixth. So C, D, E, F, G, A. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's a generic sixth. And it consists of 9 half steps. C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A. So, generic sixth that consists of 9 half steps, and it is the distance between the first and sixth note of a major scale. In C, that's the distance between C and A. And then we have our seventh, and that's the end. So we're going to give you a major seventh. That is a generic seventh that consists of 11 half steps. And yes, you guessed it, the distance between the first and seventh note of a major scale is a major seventh. In our example here, it's the distance between C and B. That is a generic seventh, and it is a generic seventh that consists of 11 half steps. So you have 2 half steps, 4, 5, 7, 9, and 11. 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, and 11. That will give you a major second, a major third, a perfect fourth, a perfect fifth, a major sixth, and a major seventh. 2, 3, 6, and 7 are majors. 5 and 4 are perfects. I guess perfects is a word. So before we move on to the other types of thirds and fourths and fifths and whatnot, let's actually do a little bit of practice with this, with just the majors and the perfects. So what if we wanted to get the note that is a perfect fifth above F? Well, you would need the note that is a generic fifth above F. So we're going to count up 5. F is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's C. So it's going to be some kind of C. Maybe it's a C sharp, maybe it's a normal C, a natural C. Maybe it is, for some god-awful reason, a C flat. So what we need to find is the C that is 7 half steps above F. So we're going to start with F, and this time I'm going to count out in flats because the last couple times I counted out in sharps. So from F to G flat is 1, G is 2, A flat is 3, A is 4, B flat is 5. What's after that? B is 6, C is 7. So the distance between F and C is 7 half steps. That means the distance between F and C is a perfect fifth. Now let's do another example, maybe a major third. So let's do a major third above D. So we know it's got to be some kind of third, so we're going to count up D, E, F. 1, 2, 3. So I know it's going to be some kind of F, right? But which F? Is it going to be an F sharp? Is it going to be an F? Is it going to be an F flat for some god-awful reason? Let's find out. So how many half steps were there in a major third? There were 4. So let's count up. From D to D sharp is 1. From D sharp to E is 2. From E to F is 3. From F to F sharp is 4. So from D to F sharp, that is a major third, and that's how this works. So now, if you're ready, let's move on to the other types of intervals. So we can take any major interval and lower it by a half step while maintaining the generic interval, and that will create a minor interval of the same, whatever that's called, with the same number. So, as an example, we know that the distance between C and E is a major third. It's a generic third, C, D, E, 1, 2, 3, and it consists of 4 half steps, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E. From C to C sharp is 1, from C sharp to D is 2, from D to D sharp is 3, from D sharp to E is 4. So we have a generic third that consists of 4 half steps. We know that is a major third. But if you lower the number of half steps by 1, you get a minor third. We know that a major third is 4 half steps, so a minor third is 3 half steps. So instead of being from C to E, it could be from C to E flat. That's still a generic third, C, D, E, 1, 2, 3. But the distance from C to E flat is only 3 half steps, whereas the distance from C to E is 4. So you can take the number of half steps in any major interval, lower it by 1, and that gives you a minor of that same interval, that same number. Another example, this time let's do a sixth, and this time let's not start with C, let's start with G. So what is a major sixth above G? So you're going to say, okay, so it has to be a generic sixth, and then it has to consist of 9 half steps. So you're going to go from G, A, B, C, D, E, that's 6. So it's going to be some kind of E. Maybe it's an E flat. We don't know. Let's find out. So G, G sharp, A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E. That is 9 half steps. So from G to E is a major sixth. If you wanted to make it a minor sixth, you would have to maintain the letters. You would have to maintain the generic relationship, so that it would have to be some kind of G and some kind of E. But it would have to be 8 half steps. So you could do, G sharp to E, because from G sharp to A is 1, A sharp to B sharp, B is 3, C is 4, C sharp is 5, D is 6, D sharp is 7, E is 8. That would be 8 half steps with a generic relationship of sixth, thus making it a minor sixth. So you take the half step value of any major interval and you lower it by 1 and you get a minor interval. And then you can lower it again and you get a diminished interval. So let's do one example here and then we're going to go because this video is getting really freaking long. Let's do a seventh. So let's say we are in the key of E and we want to get a major seventh. We'll start with our major seventh. What does that make our major seventh? So we know it's going to be a generic seventh that consists of 11 half steps. So E, F, G, A, B, C, D. That is 7. So it's going to be some kind of D. What kind of D is it going to be? Is it going to be a D sharp, a D flat? Let's find out. So from E to F is 1. From F to F sharp is 2. G, G sharp, A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp. That is 11. So from E to D sharp is 11, and it is a generic interval of 7, so that is a major seventh. So from E to D sharp is a major seventh. Pro tip, you just go down 1 half step and then go an octave up, and that is the same as a major seventh. So it's the note right before the next octave. That gives you your major seventh. Anywho, you take that 11 and you lower it by 1 to get a minor seventh. So that would be like the distance from E to D rather than the distance from E to D sharp. That would be 10 half steps. E to D is 10 half steps rather than 11. But you could take that 10 and lower it by 1 more to get a diminished seventh. So you would still have a generic seventh, but it would consist of 9 half steps. So now you're dealing with a D flat because the distance between E and D flat is 9 half steps. And it's still between an E and a D. It's still a generic seventh. So that's how you go take the majors from major to minor to diminished. You can also increase them, and when you increase them, they go from major to augmented. Let's do a quick example. Let's say that I am singing a G, and I want you to sing the note that is a major second above G. That wouldn't sound too great, but let's just say. So you would sing an A, because you know that an A is 2 half steps above G, and it is a generic second above G. So I'm singing a G, and you're singing an A, and we are creating a major second with our voices, because that's super exciting. But then you want to make it an augmented second. So you're going to take that 2 and you're going to increase it to 3. So now you have a generic second that consists of 3 half steps. So instead of being from G to A, it's going to be from G to A sharp, because G, G sharp, A sharp. That is 3 half steps, but it's still a generic second because G, A, 1, 2. And it's true that if you keep going, you can have, say, double augmented or double diminished or stuff like that. But those are rare, and you don't actually see those, so I'm actually not going to even bother now, except for that warning. Now, when it comes to perfects, so we've talked thus far about majors and adjusting the number of half steps in a major interval. When it comes to perfects, they're pretty much exactly the same, but there is no minor below them. So when you take the number of half steps in a perfect interval and you lower it by 1, you have a diminished, and when you increase it by 1, you have an augmented version of that same interval. We'll do an example of both, and then we'll call it a day. So if I were to play a B and I were to ask you to play a diminished fifth above the B, you would say, okay, I know what a perfect fifth is. That's 7 half steps above the B, and it's a generic fifth. That gives me an F sharp. So the diminished fifth above the B would be an F, because now we have a generic fifth that consists of 6 half steps rather than 7. That would be a diminished fifth. Let's say I was playing an E and I wanted you to play the note that is an augmented fourth above the E. You would say, okay, so the perfect fourth I know is 5 half steps above the E, so that's A. I know that is an A, so instead of going 5 half steps, I'm going to go 6 because it's augmented, and that would give me an A sharp. So from E to A sharp is an augmented fourth. So if you take the number of half steps in a major interval and you lower it by 1, you get minor. You lower it by another, you get diminished. You raise it by 1, you get augmented. If you do it with a perfect interval, you lower it by 1, you get diminished. You raise it by 1, you get augmented. And then after augmented, you have double augmented. And then after or before diminished, you have double diminished, but nobody really cares about those. In the beginning of this video, I showed you how you can get really weird-looking notes in some of your scales, so that you can get like B sharps or F flats or something like that. You can get those in doing intervals as well. So if I asked you for an augmented fifth above an E, you would say, okay, I'm going to start with the E, and then I'm going to go up an augmented fifth. What does that mean? That means I'm going to go up to the B. That's a perfect fifth, and then I need to go to the note after B to get to the augmented fifth, right? Because it needs to be 8 half steps rather than 7. So you're like, all right, from E to B is a perfect fifth. From E to C, you want to say C, right? Because the note after B is C, but it needs to stay a fifth. If you go to C, that means the letters change and the generic interval changes. If you go from B to B sharp, you can get a augmented fifth above E. Even if on the streets, when you're jamming, when you're hanging out, you call it a C. When you're talking to your theory professor, you should call it a B sharp because he doesn't have a life. Anyway, for an even weirder example, let's say that I'm playing a G sharp and I'm like, I want you to play the note that is an augmented fourth above G sharp. You would say to yourself, I got this. I know that the perfect fourth is C sharp. So, and because that is a fourth, that consists of 5 half steps. So I'm just going to raise that B step 1 half step, and I'm going to get me an augmented fourth. But you're like, wait a minute. It needs to stay a C. Well, we're at C sharp. There's no more C. So we know about C flat, we know about C, we know about C sharp. The next note is D. There's no other kind of Cs. So they sometimes say C double sharp because they have no lives and they don't know what to do with themselves. So an augmented fourth above a G sharp would actually be a C double sharp, known on the streets by its alias D. And that brings us to the end of today's lesson, and that was probably the most boring lesson that I will have ever taught or ever will teach ever in my life, ever. And if you have made it this far, God bless you. You're a trooper. Anywho, we're going to try to tackle some triads, some major and minor chords, maybe some diminished chords, and some sevenths. Some seventh chords in our next lesson, and that will be much more exciting than this one. Until then, thanks for watching.